Salve omnes, welcome to this week's video tutorial. We will continue our reading and discussion of the story of Theseus and the Minotaurus in Latin. So I want to pick up where we left off. Namely line 80. And once again, this level of Latin, I think, is a little bit more intuitive than the Wheellock's Latin. So this is a great opportunity for us to improve our Latin, focusing on the fundamentals. And the story itself is, I think, somewhat intrinsically interesting. So as always, I'll go through this again with this format. As you know by now, it's not the perfect format. It lacks the flexibility of in-class dialogue and conversation. So as always, if I'm going too fast or if I say something that you wish I had said, please email me or post your comments on the discussion board. I also have to confess, as you know, this is not my full-time job, namely teaching at Campbell anymore. And so I enjoy teaching, but I'm a little bit behind in my grading, and I hope to be able to post your grades today and very soon. So I apologize for that, but it's very long days. All right, so here we go. So tum is just an adverb, means then. So then Theseus. Philum is the thread. This is the thread of Ariadne. That's where we get the word filament in English. So the thread of Ariadne after himself literally was dragging. So here's our present participle of the third declension. So we put all together. Then Theseus, dragging or taking the thread of Ariadne after him. Again, he's going into the labyrinth, and he's using this thread so he can find his way back out. Entered, intrevit. So here's the perfect form of intro. So entered the labyrinth. So this is fairly straightforward. Here is second declension, accusative, singular. So that makes it our direct object. Again, if we were in the classroom, as I've said before, I would definitely use this more often. This is really important if you don't understand the case endings, because I'm not going to go back and forth very often in the reading, but here we can see labyrinthum, second declension, accusative, singular. So knowing these case endings, having them next to you as we go through this reading is probably helpful. And, so ac is another way of saying and. It's a conjunction. And then sine more, without delay. Again, they give us some notes here, although this one you probably know from the Wheellock's Latin. It means to continue. So more, without delay, means to continue. And he continued doing what? Searching for the Minotaur, who was expecting him or waiting for him in the middle of the labyrinth. So this clause here, of course, you could change the word order if you want, but again, it's fairly straightforward that he was seeking the Minotaurum expectantum. We know that the Minotaur is in the accusative because this third declension, accusative, singular, and second declension, accusative, singular. And then, where is the Minotaur? He's sort of in the middle of the labyrinth. And so here we have our ablative endings. Quem post brevam pugnam gladio accedit, and then kind of very quick, and this doesn't really give us a fighting scene, whom he killed after a short battle with his sword. So here it's talking about, remember Sira is telling this to Quintus, and that Theseus killed Quem is referring back to the Minotaur, and then with his sword, post, after a brief battle, after a brief fight. And then here we have an ablative absolute after the Minotaur had been killed. So it's a good example of ablative. We can see the second declension, ablative, singular endings. Remember, ablative absolutes are often a participial clause at the beginning of the sentence. So this is clearly an ablative absolute. So after, we put it in the past tense because we have second declension participle endings. Again, the wheel ox is still a good reference source. If you're unclear about ablative absolutes, I would look in that and you'll see that this is clearly an ablative absolute. So after the Minotaur had been killed, Theseus, the thread of Ariadne, followed, exit of labyrinth easily found. Now, of course, in English, we want to put this verb earlier in the sentence. So after he had killed the Minotaur, Theseus easily found, facile reperit, the exit of the labyrinth, following secutus, the thread of Ariadne. And so Theseus, ob means for the sake of. And by the way, there's also some good notes over here for that last sentence. And so Theseus saved, survivit. Again, you've had enough Latin by now to know the verb's probably at the end, sure enough. And so Theseus saved because of love of his fatherland and his citizens. I guess, no, this guy. So Theseus saved the Athenian citizens because of love of his fatherland from the savage monster. So that's how that one works there. And again, once again, you can change the word order. But from the savage monster, for the sake of love of the fatherland, he saved. So here is our kives, suos. This is interesting. So this is, of course, third declension, accusative, plural. So that's our direct object. You can see our third declension, accusative, plural, ace. But we have suos as the possessive adjective in the second declension, just because his is a first, second declension adjective ending word. So it's suos kevis, or kevis suos is the endings for those two words. And then this seems to be Sira talking here, and she says, so literally haec sunt quae. So these are the things that are being said, that are said about the death of the Minotaur. So she's giving a summary of that. So haec sunt quae, these are the things that are said, are narrated about the death. So here's our ablative, and then of the Minotaur, second declension, genitive singular. And then here Quintus says, please continue, or continue. Perge means continue. We had that earlier in the reading. And he says, tell me about Theseus and Ariadne. Surely she followed him. So surely she, referring back to Ariadne, followed, secuta est, Theseus, him. So here we're on part 3. And then Sira says, Theseus, literally exiting from the labyrinth, Minotaurus, so here's our present participle, Minotaurus, and we need to turn the page here. So had killed the Minotaur is how that works here, and he says, literally, let us rejoice, my citizens, or let us rejoice, my friends. Into emeni means look at my bloody sword. So he's showing to the other sailors and everybody outside of the labyrinth that his sword is covered with blood. Cruella, cruentum means blood or bloody. And then gladium cruentum, bloody. And then he says, follow me to the port. So they're going to go back to the ship here. So here we have just second person plural imperative. So follow me to the port. There, prepare. There. My ship is prepared to sail. This one's fairly straightforward as well. So let's go back to the ship. We have the ship, the navis. That my ship, navis mea. So its ship is feminine. That's why we have mea here, not meos. And then to sailed, ad navigandum. Then, in fact, ad navigandum which is a kind of guarantee of obligation. You can see it just means to sail, navigare. Sequimini also means come with me. So again, this Lingua Latina does a good job of simplifying some of perhaps the less familiar vocab. And then tum means then, and then looking or seeing Ariadne. So here it's referring to Theseus, because Ariadne is first declension accusative singular, am. So we know that she's the object of being seen. So then looking at Ariadne, he says, and you, or follow me. So come with me, and let us set out. Let us set out with me to Athens. So set out with me to Athens. And then Ariadne, who was not wanting anything more, or literally who nothing greater was wanting. In other words, she wanted to go with him. Says, I am prepared to literally to flee, but to go. In other words, to leave and go with him, leave her father, and go with him to Greece. I am prepared to go, she said, and thus, without delay, she boarded the ship of Theseus. So again, fairly straightforward. Navam is third declension accusative singular, and then Theseus, of course, is second declension genitive. Hence, we have the M, E endings. Conscendit means to climb. I think we've had this in the wheelocks with the earlier chapter on the Trojan horse. Theseus solvit navam, that means set sail. It's just the way it literally dissolved, or let go of the anchor. So Theseus set sail and sailed with the daughter of the king to the island of Naxos. So cum, of course, is always followed by the ablative. So here we have filiae, because first declension ablative singular is a, and then of the king would be third declension genitive singular, because king is third declension, so is, so filia regis, and then our verb is just in the past tense here. And then Naxos, they tell us it's the island. There, indeed, again, that we've said before, the indeed just kind of emphasizes. You can say there, at night, while in the dead of night, he left Ariadne sleeping. So here he abandons her on the island. Again, this is somewhat of an abbreviated version. The fuller version, one of the main sources for Theseus, who is considered the greatest of Athenian heroes, even greater than Achilles, is Plutarch. Plutarch's Lives, significant source of the ancient world, written in the 2nd century. But there are some famous chapters where Plutarch compares Theseus with Romulus, and also much more favorably, by the way, and also talks about the many virtues of courage that Theseus represented for the Greek mind and spirit. So if you're interested in exploring this further, you can take a look at an e-text of Plutarch's Lives, which again is considered one of the most significant sources about the ancient world that we still have. So he left her there, in the middle of the night while she was sleeping, dormientum. So we know that the participle dormientum is agreeing with Ariadne, because here we have a first declension accusative singular, here's third. And then he set out himself, perfectus es, for the island of Naxos, or Naxos. Early in the morning, so the next day, Ariadne awakened from her sleep and sought her lover on the shore, but she didn't find him. The girl, the unhappy girl, the miserable girl, climbed from literally the low part of the shore to a high rock, and here we have kind of an image of that. So she climbs up to the Altum Saxum, from where, whence seeing the ship of Theseus in the distance, she saw of the sea. So from where she saw Theseus' ship far off in the sea. So here's his ship over here, and here she is over here in a state of grief. Then, although, Etsy means although, her voice was not able to be heard by anyone. So she's there singing, she's lonely, singing to herself. She yells, or she yells to her fleeing lover, Theseus, Theseus, come back to me. But of course, she doesn't get any response. So olim responsum is returned to her. Remember, in Latin, ae can mean to her, or to him. In this case, it means to her. So there was no response returned to her. Remember, she heard nothing back. And the only thing that, and besides, her voice, literally her voice itself, had been sort of muted by the rocks, is sort of the sense here. Let's see here. So, and besides, her voice, literally the voice itself, had been muted by the rocks. Within a short time, or a short time later, the navis e conspecto eos abiit, the ship was lost from sight. So literally went away from sight. Nor was she seeing any of the sail in the sea. So she lost sight of the sail, the velum, in the distance. Therefore, Ariadne descended back onto the shore. So she went back down to the Litus. And here, and then she was sort of pacing back and forth, so literally running back and forth, huc et illuc. And then she starts to shed many tears, multis cum lacrimis, capillum et vestum scindimat. And so both her hair and her clothes are filled with tears, cum lacrimis, as is a custom for those who are not happy, but sad or in grief. So remember, these arrows mean the opposite. So the opposite of happy or praise is to be in grief or sadness. And so ut here means as human beings are accustomed to are in grief. Again, that sounds a little bit wooden, but you get the idea here. And thus, the miserable young girl was mourning, or was in a state of grief. Again, don't forget, you can look these words up on Whitaker, but here we know it's the opposite of praise. Who, referring back to the young girl here, and then was left behind, or excuse me, who was loving that man, who, since, almost you have to say, who, since she loved him more than any other man, amibat ante omnes, before all others was she loving. She was left behind alone, relicta erat sole, just as, so sicut means just as, or left alone in the wild, literally the uninhabited islands, just as a timid sheep is left behind with savage wolves. So sort of emphasizing the cruelty of her abandonment, that she's on this deserted island. In fact, Phares Insulae might be misinterpreted as deserted island. And she's sort of sacrificed. She feels used. She helped him, and he has abandoned her, is the sense here. Then Quintus says, why did Theseus desert his lover, or literally desert his girlfriend, or her in this case? And then Sirius says, tale sunt viri mi puer montes auri feminis pelicentur tua promison labi viscintur ac feminis sine numo deserunt. So she says, such are men, my boy, or that there are such men, my boy. montes are, literally who promise mountains of gold to women, and then they forget their promises, literally to they forget their promises or break their promises, like obliviousness. They forget what they have promised, and they desert women, without without giving them without any reward. Is sort of the sense here. This is a little bit more poetic here, but the idea here is that they're being promised great happiness and great riches, and then these promises are broken, and the women are abandoned, because that is the nature of men. And then whoever whoever has promised such things and has forgotten such things, let's see, quam vir qui feminim amivat. Let's see how to best translate this here. So whoever has forgotten such a promise, right? Or I guess in this case, how could somebody who has made such a promise forget that promise when he has loved a woman as when he was in love with such a woman? That's sort of the sense. You almost have to start right here, is that how could someone break such a promise if there was a man who loved a woman like he loved? And so how could that promise be broken? And then, let's see, I guess this is referring to Sira. She says, I too was once abandoned by a rich man who had promised me, great things. So I too, ego quoque, once was deserted, was abandoned by a rich man, ab amico pecunioso, who had promised, policitus erat, me many things. Magne Ceres had promised me. Noli vero potare me, so don't think, so noli, indeed, but don't think me to, I guess, but don't think that I loved him, that I had loved him, amivice eam, just for the sake of money. So don't indeed think me for desire of money to have loved him. So these last few lines, a little bit more complex in terms of the syntax, in terms of getting the best translation. You would have to massage it over a little bit more than I've done here, but I think the main idea of the story is fairly clear. Ego eum amebam. And then remember, for this particular approach, the Romans didn't translate. And so one of the things the Lingua Latina is trying to do, as I mentioned last week, is just like in English, we're not translating into French or German, we're reading in English. And so that's called reading comprehension, of course. And so that's sort of the sense of this. Ego eam amebam quia eam probum virum esse credibam. I was loving him because I was believing him to be a good man. So literally, him was loving because him, good man to be, I was believing. Although now I weep for the love of that man, or although even to this day I am still in grief or and sad because of my love for that man. So Quintus is learning a little bit about human passion and its happiness and pain. And then Quintus says, because he is sympathetic to what Sira's saying, and he says, forget that bad man who has deserted you. So forget him. But then Sira says, well, it is not so easy to forget literally an ancient love or an old love. So non facile est, so not easy it is of love old to forget. But you do not understand this yet, because he's a young boy. But hoc tu non dum intelligis, but you do not understand this as yet, my Quintus. I will return to the telling of the story, which I had almost forgotten, quam prope oblita sum, while I was talking to you about such things. So, dum, I was talking about such things, de aliis rebus. So then, indeed, we're coming to the end of the reading of this chapter, and then here's another ablative absolute. So with Ariadne being left, after Ariadne had been left on the island of Naxo, Theseus was sailing to his homeland at Patrum Suum. Meanwhile, his father Aegeus, Theseus' father, the king of the Athenians, was looking from a high rock onto the sea. So it's kind of a nice contrast. There's Ariadne on the sea, watching him go away, where his father is watching him return. Within a short time, the ship of the sun came into view. So within a short time, the ship of the sun, their second declension genitive singular, came, venit, into view in conspectum. But the ship the ship returning was carrying that black sail. We talked about that earlier. It was basically a death sentence to go to the labyrinth. Nobody had ever returned. And then he was supposed to change, as you'll see in a second, change the color of the flag if he were still alive, but the ship is still bearing the black flag, the Entravela, which it was carrying when it went away. So Theseus had forgotten, oblitus erat, if you're oblivious of something, you forget something. So he had forgotten after after the killing of the Minotaur, to change mutare, the flag. So there's a nice sentence here. Theseus, had forgotten, oblitus erat, to change the flag after the killing of the Minotaur. And thus Aegeus, let's see here. Let's see. And thus Aegeus, okay, let's see here. Was thinking, so if something is, in this case, thought that color was signifying the death of his son. So arbitretus is what thought. So thus Theseus, or not Theseus, but Aegeus, his father, thought that color, elo colore, to signify the death of his son. So here's third declension, accusative singular, and then of his son, second declension, genitive singular. Without delay, he threw himself on the rocks, i.e. because he's mourning the death of his father. And of course, that's a nice intertext with Ariadne. Because, literally from his name also now, okay, so he threw himself into the sea, and thus, the sea, i.e. the sea in which he threw himself into, bears his name. So literally, he threw himself into the sea, that from his name also now Sea of Aegeus is called. And so kind of jumps ahead a little bit ahead in the narrative here, but the father throws himself into the sea, and hence the sea is named after his father, is the sense here, literally from his name. So after the death of the king, after the death of King Aegeus, his son Theseus was made king of the Athenians. That one's pretty straightforward. So after the death of King Aegeus, his son Theseus was made factus es king of the Athenians, who ruled for many years Athens with great glory. So who ruled for many years, multos annos, Athens, with great glory. And with these words, so here we have kind of a present tense ablative absolute. With these words, Sira literally made an end of the story. In other words, with these words, Sira finished her story. All right, so that is that. And again, it's an interesting story. Please also, as part of your homework, and I'll indicate this, please send me your answers to questions 9 through 12. I think lines 1 through 80 actually allowed you to answer all of these questions. And also, please use Whitaker's words to learn the learning vocabulary for the next test, which will include these words right here. All right, so please send me any questions you have about this reading. This chapter will be the basis of the next test, which will be after spring break at some point. And so I think it's not too difficult, but you'll have to clearly use these videos and take screenshots on your own so you have a copy of the text. If you would like a hard copy, you'll have to email me and give me ample time, because I generally don't have hard copies of this, but I'm happy to bring a hard copy to one of my German classes, and you can stop by and pick up a hard copy if you would like.